Dr. Jazz.
We really
Dr.
need to stay
Jazz.
connected more with COVID, and so this is really wonderful. I've been doing a lot of Zoom concerts and, just touching, recording online, and it's really great that we have this technology now.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I wanted to ask you. You sent me the album Distant Duos, and I guess, you've done this. I've done so much also during this COVID era, this distant recording, and I loved it. And I think, can you explain me a little bit the process about distant duos? And I think you did it long distance, right? And where did the idea come, and how did you decide on the musicians who to cooperate with, and how did the whole process go? I mean,
I think it was, I started this online recording process in about 2008, actually.
already? Oh, wow.
Because I had connected on Facebook and, if you remember, MySpace with a lot of musicians in Europe, and some CDs with a pianist in Russia. The trumpet player is in Germany. The guitar players in Germany also. The singer and the trumpet player were in Norway.
Wow.
And then the bass player was in Nashville, and the drummer was in France. So we were all sending tracks back and forth, and we did 4 CDs that way.
I read. Wow.
And I did 3 with Axel Weiss that way. And it was really great to just record. They would send either a main track, like a rhythm section track, and I would solo in different parts over it. The one with the project with Stan Z, it was called the Kazargan World. We added, it was kind of, the whole tune was improvised, nothing was written out, and Stan would just send a part, and then the trumpet would add something, and I would add something, and it was sort of like solos were bouncing off each other. It wasn't like a traditional jazz tune, although there was a melody and kind of solo sections and different sections, but it was all improvised online. So when COVID hit in 2020, I did this one, which is a really nice cover by Pien van der Beek, who is an artist in Rotterdam that I found online. And I just did solo improvisations to one of her paintings every day to kind of expand my practice time, because I was just sitting here at home and the streets were completely quiet. New York was completely shut down, so it was really bizarre. But so I did that, and then following year we did these, which this one's live from a gallery, an art gallery in my neighborhood. And this one I had done with David Haney and Michael Eaton, because we had been Zooming from Oregon and Kansas City and New York. So we decided to record. And since I have my own record label, I just do these little bootlegs. And then this year, I wanted to do something for Women's History Month. So I did this one. It's another cover by Pien van der Beek. She's an incredible artist. I'm really drawn to like all her paintings for some reason.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
I really just love everything that she does. So all these women that I wrote online, I know all of them, and I've heard all of them in New York, and I love all their improvising. And I thought, well, let's just record while we're all sitting here. It was Omicron, so things kind of backed off here, and they shut down a little bit. And so I just sent out ideas, improvisations, and they took solos with me. I had a couple poets that I usually record with here, Susan Young and Puma Perl, and some violinists and some flutists, and some saxophone players and bassoon and voice. I asked all the women musicians that I knew, because I thought, especially now there's more women being accepted into jazz, which wasn't really the case when I started playing in 1972. I mean, I would go to jam sessions. I never saw any women there,
Yeah.
which was pretty frightening, you know, when you're in your 20s and you're trying to learn this craft and you're kind of just there on your own, and you not only kind of stick out, but you're invisible because it's just all men, which is, I mean, it's just a really bizarre thing, and I try not to dwell on that, so I just kept going anyway. But the only woman I saw back then really playing was Joanne Burkeen with Art Blakey, and of course jazz singers, you know, Betty Carter and, you know, Ella Fitzgerald. They were coming. I was in San Francisco at that time in studying music, so there were a lot of singers, but no, you know, female-led jazz groups really to speak of. So now that things are kind of opening up, I wanted to do something this year to focus on the women improvisers that I know, because also, Samo, I saw this new free jazz film, Fire Music, and they had an interview with Carla Bley and with Ingrid Sterzo, and they spoke about Eric Dolphy, and they spoke about, you know, some of their memories of the free jazz guys, but they didn't mention any of their music, and they're giants in improvisation. I mean, these women have contributed so much, and one of the first LPs I ever heard that really influenced me back in the 70s was Escalator Over the Hill with Carla.
Oh, yeah, but Carla, yeah,
and
it's incredible.
She had like an amazing, you know, Jack Bruce was on that, Linda Ronstadt, all these jazz guys. I mean, it was, everybody was on that, and it was an incredible, you know, set. It was a big LP set. It was like this thick, you know. But that really floored me that in 2022 that a new film about free jazz would come out, and there wasn't even a mention of Barbara Donald or, you know, any free jazz improvising women. So that was kind of the idea for this. I just wanted to focus on these women that I know, that probably a lot of people don't even know their names, you know, in different parts out of New York City. So I think that's really important to, you know, do that if I have a chance to record and I can put it on Bandcamp, that somebody will notice that, you know.
Yeah, that's so much easier nowadays with the Bandcamp. You can reach out to people and you slowly build a base. And you mentioned you have your own label. When did you start doing that, like as your own label, under your own label?
I was recording with some of the established jazz guys here in New York in the 90s, like 90, 91, 92. And whenever I, you know, wanted to record some of my compositions, because we were all writing and composing a lot in the 80s, everybody had great jazz tunes they were writing, and everybody would kind of get together and, you know, play other people's tunes. And so when I finally wanted to record some of mine, the only answer I got was, you know, call all the famous jazz guys to record with you. And I really wanted to record with the band that I had been playing with, this quartet. So I just decided to do it myself, and we recorded in the drummer's studio basement. His roommate mixed it. I printed them down at a CD printing place down in Lower Manhattan, and the guitar player and I went down and picked up the boxes of CDs, and I got a distributing company, Qualiton, which is here in Long Island City, and we drove the boxes of CDs over to this distributor, and I got them, you know, spread out nationwide in Tower Records and, you know, some record stores at the time. This was 96, 97.
Yeah.
And I established a name for the record label, and I just did it myself. And then, you know, 96, 97, there still wasn't any internet or anything. But when things started opening up in 2006, 2008, and all that online recording, I mean, I started recording more than I ever did my entire life because of this online
Yeah.
presence. So I just felt like, with the groups that I put together also in the 80s when I first moved to New York, I didn't get so many calls to be a side person because I only played flute. I didn't play clarinet and sax and,
Yeah.
all these other things. I was just focusing on flute. So I knew I'd have to be my own band leader, and I also knew because I was a woman playing jazz, after going through this naive phase that, wow, maybe I could be a side person with, Art Blakey. No, it wasn't going to happen on flute. So I decided I'm just going to have to do it myself, and that's what I did. And that's what I'm still doing. I'll be 68 next month, so
Wow.
I'm
Yeah.
still here.
No, I mean, you've been extremely prolific. I mean, like, since, yeah, like you said, since '97. I mean, but I wanted to go a little bit back now, and I want to return to the '80s. You're uh, entering the New York kind of scene, and but you mentioned like Carla Bley's Escalator album, and who were some other records, let's say in the early '70s, I guess, that maybe flute-wise, I don't know, Eric Dolphy pops on my mind, or Lou Tabakin, or so many other players, like, but Eric for me, like, in the improvised world at least. But like, what records blew your mind that you decided actually, okay, I want to do the improvised stuff?
Oh, Samo, it was so amazing in the 70s, I gotta tell you. And I noticed you're doing an Eric Dolphy on guitar. That's so
Yeah,
cool. I
yeah,
noticed that.
I was
That's
obsessed
really,
with Eric.
congratulations, because his lines are
Yeah.
just amazing. I actually have a solo flute piece that's kind of a classical piece, and the first phrase is one of Eric Dolphy's phrases, and then the rest is like a solo for alto flute, like a more classical piece. But it's really got a great jazz feel. But when I was in college up at UC Berkeley in the San Francisco area, this was 74, 75, 76, Keystone Corner was there in San Francisco
Oh yeah,
for
exactly.
one thing. And so we heard, and I had a waitress job from college. I would go over to San Francisco at night to waitress at this musical that was right through the alleyway from Keystone Corner. So there was Green Street and Vallejo Street, and there was this little alley, and there was Keystone Corner. And that time, I mean, Old and New Dreams played there,
Oh
Cecil
man.
Taylor played
Oh,
there, U.B. Blake played there, Dexter Gordon came over his first time from Europe, he played there. I mean, Todd Barkin had everybody. I heard Rastan Roland Kirk there, and he gave us these little medallions that said bright moments. The whole audience got these,
oh wow.
He like passed out these little charms. I mean, it was just an amazing time. And then at UC Berkeley, I was playing in the jazz band because most of the saxophone players didn't have flute, so I got to play the flute parts with the big band.
Hmm.
And we did some great arrangements by Rolf Johnson, who's still, making these amazing, beautiful arrangements. The one that I still remember from the 70s was he did this one for the tune Spring Can Really Hang You Up the Most, and it had this beautiful flute part,
Hmm.
and I was like learning so much. And at that time, there was also a real Brazilian
Yeah.
influx, so Ayerto and Flora Purim played at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. There was all this Brazilian, crossover jazz. Billy Cobham was doing funk at
Yeah.
that time, and he came through San Francisco. Some of the other LPs that were coming out at that time were, let's see, well, the first two that I heard that got me into jazz. And he played for me Red Clay, which was a CTI record by Freddie Hubbard,
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
which had beautiful arrangements with
Yeah.
Hubert Laws and all these cats on it. And the other LP he played for me was Bitches Brew. So also all that stuff all that experimenting Miles was doing was coming out in the 70s too. So when I heard Red Clay and Bitches Brew, I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God, my mind exploded, you know? And I was like, that's what I wanted to do. So it was an incredible time for experimenting. And I think another album that came out was Mingus Cumbia and Jazz
Right.
Fusion. There was just so many great, LPs coming out, and all of us in college, we couldn't wait to get our hands on them and, listen to every tune and analyze them, and we were going through that because there was no internet. It was all
Yeah.
word of mouth.
Yeah, it's like always when I talk to your generation, it's like, I mean, I was a CD baby kind of guy. We bought CDs, but it was the same process, and I saved up some money and then I went to the jazz store. I was like, okay, I'll take this one. And then you cherish the moment. You read the booklet and the liner notes, and for you guys, it was even more romantic because you had this huge LP, and I really miss this process actually. I mean, I still try to preserve it, to buy CDs on concerts if artists have them, just like this romantic notion of really wearing out an album and becoming familiar with it. Not like nowadays. I think music just goes by too fast. People don't take time, to listen to 60 minutes of composed music or improvised. So I can just imagine, when you say that, how it must have been like. Yeah, it's beautiful. Beautiful stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like there was more time to just sit down and,
Yeah.
get a bunch of people in the apartment for spaghetti and listen to this stuff, But but we also in college we did some Pacific Coast jazz festivals, and one that I really remember, they brought in all the CTI guys. This
Oh yeah.
was I think 75, and so we played big band arrangements of First Light with Freddie Hubbard
Woo.
and
Yeah.
Hubert Laws, and Sonny Rollins played. And I just remember sitting on the left side of the stairs at Zellerbach Hall, which is a big hall on the UC Berkeley campus, where they have concerts. And we sat and listened to Sonny Rollins, and he took this really long cadenza for forever, like at the end of this big band chart. And the director didn't even want to bring him back in. He was sort of like, he just kind of went off stage, And Sonny Rollins just played and played and played and played and played. It was just a wonderful experience. And then after I graduated, I decided to come to New York because all the jazz guys that were playing at Keystone Corner, they said, if you want to play jazz, you have to be in New York. It was still the center there. And I had met all the guys with Horace Silver and with Mongo Santa Maria, and they kind of influenced me to move here. So my first roommate in the Lower East Side was Harold White, who was the drummer then at the time with Horace Silver, and we had it was like 2 rooms with a kitchen and a bathtub in the middle, and it overlooked the Empire State Building on 13th Street. So it was like this illegal sublet in the East Village. I mean, the whole neighborhood was like a war zone. It was completely demolished, but it was a wonderful time. And I met Woody Shaw at that time. He came over to the apartment. I mean, Cedar Walton was there. I got to talk to him about Charlie Parker tunes. I mean, it was just, there was access to all these great musicians, and Henry Threadgill, the other great flutist that I love.
I love Henry Threadgill.
He had a studio on 13th Street, so I went over there when I first did my first little demo tape, and I took my tape to him, and I'm like, what do you, I was asking his advice, and I could just, walk around the neighborhood, and all these guys were just walking around.
Yeah,
I mean, Cecil Taylor lived, a few blocks away. George Coleman was on 14th Street. Everybody was here, and there was a place called Bradley's that stayed open all night.
Sure.
And so all the guys, after their gigs, like at the Vanguard or Fat Tuesdays, they would go over there, and you could talk to all of them. You know, Stanley Crouch was always there. Um, you know, Tommy Flanagan was
Mm.
there. You could talk to him. It was just, you know, it was base with those really experienced jazz guys, and that's one of the things I miss about COVID is it's all typing, and
Yeah,
I always say that Facebook is the new Bradley's because this is so great, Samo, to talk because
yeah,
there's so much typing now and not so much talking these days.
yeah. No, but especially this now, for me, you mentioned like, you got a chance to talk to Cedar Walton or Tommy Flanagan, and for me, it's the same now talking to you guys, like, guys who are now 81 or someone like Hal Galper or, like, just there's so much history that's been made and created,
Right.
and I think it's important, especially in the improvised music, that somehow these stories are preserved, because in a more commercial jazz, of course, they survive in a way with the big names, but like you guys created also so much music, everyone, and I think it's important to keep that alive. That's why I started doing this. I just love the music, and hearing these stories like you're saying now, and I think that's really important. At least for me, I don't know, maybe I'm an idealist also. So,
No, it is. It
you
is,
know,
and I feel like when I was wandering around in 80, 81 here and touching base with some of those musicians, those are the ones really influencing the music today. I
yeah,
mean, like Joe Lovano, like Chuck Loeb, who, is gone now.
yeah.
But I played a lot of gigs with him,
Oh,
and this
really?
was even before he married Carmen Cuesta.
Oh,
We
really?
played at the Brecker Brothers Club, 7th Avenue
Oh, yeah.
South. I was doing a lot of like Brazilian music with them, and the first demo tape I did was with Fred Hersch, who I met at Bradley's, and
Oh,
then I had always wanted to play with with Ron McClure, and he was here, the bassist, because he had been playing with Dave Liebman, and Dave played flute a lot at that time, and I really loved his flute playing. So when I got a chance to do of my first recording, I called them to record, and then my first gig, I took the little demo tape down to Mark Morganelli at the Jazz Forum, which was down on Broadway, 692 Broadway, and he gave me a gig, and I did my first gig with Fred Hersch and Ron McClure and Billy Hart. Flew in
oh,
from
are you
Europe
kidding
that
me?
day and played my gig. Yeah, that was, and I was just like, oh my God, this is like jazz heaven. I was just learning so much, and I was working so hard on Fred Hersch's tunes. He writes just such
Yeah,
beautiful
beautiful stuff.
melodies, that I had written a couple lyrics to, like I did Frank Foster tune when I was in
Mhm.
California, and a couple of things because my mom always listened to Tin Pan Alley tunes. So when I was working on Fred's tunes, I just started hearing all these words, and
Mm.
I ended up writing lyrics for a lot of his tunes, and some have been recorded.
Yeah.
Also Tom Harrell's tunes. So Sheila Jordan and Rosanna Vitro and Judi Silvano, a lot of great jazz singers have recorded those. So it just, when you're connected with all these different musicians
Yeah.
and you're bouncing off all this creativity with them, just all these other things can go on and happen, in your mind, because you just get all these ideas. Like, it's so inspiring. Really, in the 80s, it was really scary in New York for me, but it was like the streets kind of felt like they were full of electricity. It was just, there
Mm.
was this kind of surging creativity just all around. And it was really a beautiful time.
How was it for you? I mean, by the way, is there still a tape of this band? I mean, do you have like recordings somewhere or of this quartet or trio with Fred
I
and
have
Ron?
I have cassette tapes. I do have a cassette tape because back then we didn't take photos, we didn't record, we
Wow,
didn't. I had
you
a
should
little
digitalize it.
CD Walkman. I had a CD Walkman, those little Walkmans
Yeah,
with a radio and
yeah, yeah.
a tape recorder in it, and that's what I recorded my gigs with.
Wow.
So yeah, I have those.
Oh, you should somehow digitalize these. Like, I mean, come on, that's.
I have digitized a couple of tunes. I put them on YouTube, but
Oh, I have to check it out.
um,
Okay.
it's just yeah, it's just such a tedious process. But yeah,
Yeah,
the cassette tapes are right there.
yeah. But come on, oof, it's it's a must. We need that. You know. But you mentioned that the 80s were this was your first gig, and but how was it still for you? Like you mentioned being a woman also already in the 70s in the jazz scene. How was it in the 80s in New York? Uh, I know you did your debut as a band leader like in the mid 90s, 96, 97, you said like, but you led obviously bands in the 80s. And
Yep.
how,
I just would call everybody that I wanted to play with. I mean, I called Andy Laverne, this really great piano
oh wow,
player,
yeah, sure, I
because
know.
I wanted to play with him, and we did this. It was actually a Chinese restaurant over on 8th Avenue that had jazz. We did a
Oh, wow.
weekend. It was just crazy. I mean, I did Washington Square Church with that was Danny Gottlieb, Tom Harrell, Carmen Cuesta, Andy Laverne, and I can't remember who else was on the gig, but it was just you could just call all these amazing people, and I mean when you get to play with people, at least for me, when you get to play with musicians that are better or more experienced than yourself, it that um, urges you
Yeah.
to a higher level. It's just, I mean, there's just so much more you can learn, and I really enjoyed exploring that whole bebop scene. Um, I did that for quite a long time. And then in 2010, I got a little skin cancer right here, and I had this huge surgery, and I thought, God, I'm never going to play flute again.
Shit, yeah.
And so my first concert was with a flute friend of mine, Nick Gianni, and we did a free jazz set because I wanted to try out my embouchure and make sure I could play in front of people. And that was 11 years ago, and that started this whole free jazz thing, that
Yeah, I wanted to ask you
journey
that
that I'm
when this,
on.
yeah, okay.
So everything, kind of everything happens for a reason, even awful stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I wanted to ask you that because yeah, like you said, the last 12 couple of years, you've done so much improvisation stuff, and which I love, and I also love this impro and composed, basically both. There are so interesting parts to investigate. But I wanted to go back just a little bit about composition and asking you as a composer, I listen to so much of your music. I mean, obviously I knew your music already from the albums with Tom Harrell. I have those, and but you as a composer, how did that go? Or that, if you still write, I mean, how did you get the ideas, or how did you usually sit down or write a melody, or where did the impulse come from? How is your process when composing?
I think the earlier tunes, I would probably say I would start with changes or a rhythmic idea,
Okay.
and then I would write the melody over that with flute. I would say the album that I did while I had stitches in my lip in 2010, I have two electric basses here, which I played in a rock band for a while
Oh,
because
really? How cool.
thought it would. I thought it would be really fun to play at CBGB's, so I did that for a while. But
Oh, wow.
anyway, I had these two basses. I have a 4 string and a 5 string here. So when my lip was pretty messed up, I wrote bass lines
Oh, yeah, sure.
and I recorded those, and then I would play the melody. I would write a melody, and then I would solo over my bass line, and that was the CD that came out in 2011. So it was me being the one girl band while I was here recuperating. But I think with the improvising, like my two groups now, the all women free jazz group,
Yeah.
Musique Libre Femmes, and the Beyond Flute group, we just solo freely with each other, you know. So as far as composing, I did the solo pieces for the artwork in 2020, and I just would write down little melodic ideas, and then I would expand that for my practicing, you know, and do an improvisation. So they were basically just melodic fragments, and I do have some free jazz, a lot of free jazz tunes now that are, I would say, 8/16 bars or maybe no bars that are melodic ideas to improvise off of. And so I've written a lot of those. I have one for Cecil Taylor, for Hamid Bluet, for, you know, a lot of these guys, you know, that have died recently, one for Francois Griot. So, you know, that's changed my composing a lot, because it's not necessarily the traditional jazz tune, AABA or whatever, with changes and, you know, the whole deal, but it's more just a melodic fragment to solo over and just expand on that idea.
Yeah, I love that too. Yeah, yeah, I love the simplicity. Like,
there's so many, but there's so many different ways you can do it. I mean, there's no right way, and if you stay, I think if you stay open. Also, one thing, because I spent a lot of time with Tom Harrell, and one of the things he always did was keep fragments. I mean, we kept, you know, anytime we thought of a melodic idea, we would just write it down on a staff piece of paper, and that sometimes develops into a composition later on down the road.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I love that. I also love that. Yeah, doing this. But you mentioned Tom now. You know, all those records, Sail Away and Form and Passages. I mean, such underrated records, because the compositions are incredible and the bands are just like, I mean, I think on one is Hayden and Motion, right? The rhythm section, and they're...
Yeah, I have to tell you, Samo, that one, Form, on Contemporary Records, 1991-92. That was my 38th birthday when we recorded that.
Oh, seriously?
And we did a short take of that song, January Spring, and then we did a long one. And when we got, you know, finished, and it was the end of the day, I said, man, you gotta get that long take on the LP. That's just a beautiful... It's a beautiful presentation of what your tune is all about, you know. And it was Tom Harrell, Joe Lovano, Danilo Perez, who had just come to town. He was 23. Charlie Hayden, Paul Motion, and me. And it was just, it was like my birthday present from New York jazz, you know. And I pleaded with them to get that long take on the LP, and he did, and that got the most reaction, I think.
That's beautiful.
From the critics, you know, from Leonard Feather, and, you know, they were like, this is the most exploration Tom has done, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, that was just, you know, I thought, this is why I moved to New York, was that tune. And that one moment still stays in my memory the strongest.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful records those. I mean, and you got to play with, you know, the greats, actually. I just, you know, who sadly, you know, Paul and Charlie both passed away, but just the...
Are gone,
Yeah, but, you know, the music lives, which is beautiful. But how did you hook up with Tom, and when was the first time you guys started cooperating? How did that happen?
I met him at Jazz Forum when I went to check out the Loft Club for my gig, and he had a gig there with Bob Berg. He was playing in a band. They had a band at that time, and Bob's also gone. But anyway, I met him at Jazz Forum, and you know, just spent tons of time with him after that for about 11 years.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Also such a composer. I love his stuff, really. He's...
Yeah, I did a lot of lyrics for his songs back then, and he writes beautiful melodies, and just he knows more about music than anyone I ever spoke to. He really is a genius.
Yeah,
He's a great musician.
yeah. Where did this idea, which you, I mean, writing lyrics, you know, I studied American poetry as my BA and MA translation I did, and so I'm really involved into poetry.
Oh,
And how did you get involved into lyrics and poetry? When did this, I mean, you said you started exploring Fred Hersch's compositions and they inspired you, but where did the, you know, the idea to playing with words come from?
I think it was probably my mom because she listened to all the Tin
Like
Pan
you said,
Alley
yeah,
tunes, you know, Cole Porter and all that
yeah,
stuff with lyrics. And I heard that growing up. I mean, she wasn't really into jazz, but she loved those tunes and the musicals and, you know, they all have beautiful
yeah,
lyrics,
yeah,
you know. Rogers and Hammerstein and all those guys were writing just incredible
yeah.
lyrics. So I heard that. That's kind of like in the back of my mind in childhood. And when I first did the lyrics for Fred, and I was working on his tunes, it was the rhythms. I mean, the rhythms gave me ideas for the words and the title. Like I would ask him, you know, do you want it about the title? Like he has this one tune, Mirage,
Hmm.
and so I wrote it about a mirage. I mean, it's pretty abstract, the lyrics, but but those rhythms gave me ideas, you know. And Tom has this tune, Viable Blues, which is a really up-tempo, straight ahead tune. And the rhythms in that tune gave me, you
Yeah,
know, ideas for the lyrics. I mean, it kind of, Tom had this one tune, it was rhythm changes, but the melody, the intro was all odd meters,
mm,
like eighth notes, but all odd meters changing bar to bar. And when he played that melody for me, I immediately heard these words, um, like Armstrong, Parker, and Gillespie. I mean, it just came to my mind, this whole like gratitude thing for all the
yeah.
jazz guys that had come before us. And it just materialized, uh, you know, miraculously that day. So I don't know. For me, it's like the rhythm is really important. That's really important for the words to fit exactly with the rhythm of the song.
Yeah. Did you ever study like, I mean, study like read, follow, you know, you mentioned rhythm, like first guy that comes to my mind is Robert Creeley when it comes to American poetry, but like, did you ever like explore modern American poetry also with this regard that you would use stuff in your lyrics or not necessarily?
Not when I was writing a lot of
Oh,
lyrics. I
well,
mean, I've
okay.
been reading, you know, more lately. I've been reading a lot of books during the shutdown, and
Yeah, sure.
um, you know, I had time when I retired to do more reading. But you know, there were always like beat poets, you know, in the
Yeah,
70s doing like poetry and jazz. That was always going on. I mean, I heard a lot of that, so I think
was
you
there
know, that kind
someone.
of influenced me through osmosis. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned before, you know, also your solo flute playing and kind of came to mind now when you mentioned the lockdowns. It's like, you know, being away from everyone and playing your instrument. I really fell in love playing solo guitar again. That's why I did the Dolphy thing. And when was the first time you did a solo flute concert? Do you remember that? And how did it feel for you? You know, when you play solo piano, it's kind of easier. Of course, you have a harmonic range and melodic, and you hide behind the instrument while playing. You know, I talked to Herb Robertson or and to many some other musicians playing solo trumpet or solo flute. It's quite intimate and intimidating as well. How did you decide to enter that world, and how was it like for you in the beginning?
I never really did solo in the beginning. I was always doing either trios or quartets or larger groups. I've been playing the local gardens around where I live the last few years and doing free improvisation, and I composed all those, I call them tunettes, the fragments that are melodic to improvise with.
Yeah.
So the first solo flute concert I did all those tunettes and improvised. So I would play the melody and then I would expand on that, and that gave me some melodic groundwork to go from, and I think that gave me more confidence than just exploring, you know, on my own without any plan.
Yeah, sure.
But so that kind of seeps into the jazz improvisation also. I mean, the flute department or the music department at UC Berkeley in California is really traditional, which was great. I mean, they gave me a background because I only started playing when I was 19, so I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do. But they had great music history and great theory and great rhythm classes, and they also had a gamelan there, which we got to play with.
Oh, wow.
And a big band, a jazz band. And, you know, there was across the board pretty much anything you'd want to learn, you could learn there and get a really strong background in music. But yeah, the classical flute music really influences me.
Yep.
And there's a gal in England now, Carla Reese. She has a lot of new flute music for alto flute, for bass flute, a lot of the alternate flutes. And I just got one for piccolo that's just amazing.
Oh.
And so I've been ordering, you know, a lot of classical music as well to work on. One of my audition pieces for UC Berkeley was the Hindemith Sonata. So I really like all the contemporary, you know, guys, and Stravinsky, and of course Webern, and, you know, Schoenberg. So that seeps into all the improvisation too. One of the things I think is really cool, growing up way back when, was that there weren't really so many categories and boundaries. I mean, it was just kind of, if it was good music, it was kind of good music.
Yeah.
And there were all these influences that got meshed together to kind of come out and with something else that was maybe more innovative, or at least something completely different. And I think that's how a lot of innovation happens. It's not by sticking with one certain way of playing or saying that only this is jazz or only this is improvising.
Yep.
I mean, it has to be more than that for the music to expand and grow, and that's just my opinion. But
No, definitely. You know, you mentioned Miles and Bitches Brew, and it's like a perfect example. You know, how would you even characterize that music?
yeah, but you know, for example, when Bitches Brew came out and those records, people hated him.
Yeah,
I
sure.
mean, the reviews were horrible.
Sure.
I mean, people don't realize they kind of love him now, but they don't realize like how much the traditional, you know, the jazz writers are going, oh, this is just, you know, this is
Always like that.
this is horrible.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't like it at all. And I mean, he was really demonized for a lot of that, you know. It's like, oh, this isn't real jazz, blah, 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 you know.
It's like Dylan when he went electric. It was the same, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or anything. It's just like, oh, what are they doing? Or not, you know, but
Right.
I wanted to ask you this. You know, speaking of Ornette, you played with Bern Nix, and
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Oh, man.
one of the most underrated guitar players, probably. You know, and how did you start
Bern
playing
was
with him, and how was it for you with him? You know, how did this story begin?
Well, that there's so many stories, Samo.
Oh, please.
When I started the free jazz adventure, I was going to this place down on Rivington, ABC No Rio, that Les Suilla had a free jazz thing every Sunday. So there'd be a couple sets of, you know, established groups, whoever was playing at the time, and then we'd all jam after that. And so after my flute exploration in 2011 with Nick, I started playing down there with different people, and Bern just started showing up at every time I played.
Mm.
And so we talked, and the owner of Downtown Music Gallery, Bruce Gallantieri,
Yep.
said, "I'd love to hear you and Bern play duo."
Oh, wow.
So Bern came over, and we just jammed for a while, and we played at Downtown Music Gallery, the Beyond Duo, and that's how I started this group with him. And I feel so lucky that I got to play with him like the last 4 or 5 years of his life, because
Yeah.
we played up at Shrine, this place in Harlem, on May 28th, 2017, and he died 2 days later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
saw
it
that.
was
It's
just,
incredible.
it was so amazing, yeah, that I got to learn, some amazing improvising from him. I mean, he pushed me every single
Mm.
time we played. It was just an amazingly fun, joyful exploration of improvising with him. And he just knew so much, I mean,
Yeah.
historically about guitar, and after all the experience with Thornette, and he had some just hilarious stories about New York in the 70s, because I kind of missed that when they were all down in Soho, but um, it was still pretty raw in the 80s, but it wasn't the same. But yeah, he was just a gem of a musician. I mean, a real um, intelligent, honest, genuine, uh, just genius on
Yeah.
guitar,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it's like, yeah, like I said, one of the most underrated guys that really,
And
really
he was very
creative.
humble,
Yeah. Yeah.
he was just very, he was very intellectual, and he was very humble, and he just, I mean, you could tell he just loved music so much, and that was the most important thing. I mean,
Yeah.
all these other considerations and the politics and whatever else, the promotion, it just wasn't a priority to him. Um,
Yeah.
and so I just feel really lucky I got to play with him, because he was so under the radar.
Yeah.
You know,
Definitely. There's so many guys like that. I don't know who I spoke to.
under the media radar.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's like I spoke with someone, I don't know who was it, but like about Kenny Wheeler, and he's also like the musician's musician, everyone loves him, the compositions. But if you go a little bit wider, it's just like, what, who? And that's so sad. So many players like that, and composers who, again, in my eyes, should be like way up there. But yeah, unfortunately, the media dictates, of course, also the jazz world and everything. So, but yeah, that's why it's important we
I take
mention these guys,
solace.
like Bern and
Oh
everyone.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, when New High, that Kenny
Oh,
Wheeler album in the
man,
70s, New
I
High, when
love
that
it.
came out, our minds were blown. I mean, that was such a great LP. But I take solace in the fact that jazz has always been this underground,
Yeah.
something that you find out secretly, and it's really exciting and wonderful and amazing. And if all the people doing hip hop and rock and roll don't know about it, who cares?
Maybe it's better. Yeah, it should stay like that. Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. I agree, actually. Yeah. But Cheryl, I wanted to ask you just in the end, like, what are your plans for the upcoming year, let's say, composition-wise or playing-wise or group-wise, or do you have some new concepts that you're working on or ideas?
Well, the really exciting thing I got to tell you, Samo, is I get to play once again at Joe's Pub with New York Jazz Stories, Dave Haney and Bernard Purdy,
Oh,
and
wow.
Jay Clayton's going to play, and Root Reeve, and Celia Sharman, and David Soares, and this is April 14th, so it's kind of, I'm going to say it's my birthday concert in
Oh, wow.
April.
That's fantastic.
And then, and then for the rest of the 2022, My Beyond Flute group is going to play around my neighborhood at the 6 BC Botanical Garden and the EV Art Gallery. And then I'm going to play solo flute at the Merchant's House Garden this summer, once a month, which is a historic house in New York. It's the oldest house that's still standing in New York City, and they have this beautiful Victorian garden in the back.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to play solo flute there this summer. And then in September at the garden, I'm going to do the Jeremy Steig Howling, the solo flute fest to remember Jeremy Steig. I've been gathering all the flutists that I know once a year to just play solo flute, and we're going to do that September 18th. So I'm planning that again this year. We did a memorial for him in 2016 when he died, and I've been trying to gather all the flutists every year because I met him in the 80s, and he was really a great inspiration for me.
Yeah, he was so important. Yeah, also one of those guys. Yeah. Oh, beautiful! You're keeping active. That's good.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Retirement rocks.
Yeah, man, I have so many books I want to read, but like no time. It's just like I keep buying new books. I love novels and reading. It's just like, man, I wait. I'm retired.
I just got Jeremy's autobiography, which is really cool. He has great
really? I have to check it out. I didn't know. Oh, wow.
Yeah, Sam, that came out in 2021, and then I got Sam Newsom's new book, Stay Creative, and John Kruth's new book, Bright Moments, about Rasan, and then I just got Me, Myself, When I'm Real, Charles Mingus by Gene Santoro. So yeah, I've been catching up on the reading.
That's fantastic. Yeah, cool. I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Super. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing some of this stuff. So really.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Samo. And your name reminds me of Jean-Michel Basquiat, who was painting here in the 80s. Are you named after him, or is that?
No, Samo is like a Slovenian name, like from the 6th century already. I don't know where Basquiat got his. But yeah, like
he used that in his when he was doing his paintings as saying the same old thing.
So it was not a name. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of to stand for the same old thing.
Okay, that was it.
Yeah. But Samo was painted all over this neighborhood when I got here. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing. But anyway, I mean, thanks so much
for speaking with me.
Yeah, thank you for.
Dr. Jazz.